Shields up, Ironbreakers, and welcome back to Monster Hunter. In today's video, I'm going to be doing my best to answer the question as to whether or not it is too late to join the hunt, to play Monster Hunter if you've never played it before. Now, I understand that a lot of the people that watch me here on YouTube are already going to be familiar with the Monster Hunter franchise, and you're likely going to be over 100 hours into whatever happens to be your current Monster Hunter game of choice. Whether you've started all the way back with Freedom Unite, or Monster Hunter Tri, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, 4 Ultimate, or most likely Monster Hunter World, because that is where we've seen one of the biggest influxes ever of hunters, because it was the first worldwide simultaneous release of a Monster Hunter game, and naturally also because it featured much improved visuals and fluidity of gameplay, so on and so forth. But regardless of where you've started, I would like you to head into the comments and let everybody know on your opinion as to whether or not it is too late to start playing Monster Hunter, so that the people that end up watching this video don't just have to hear it from me. You guys can read in the comment section what is everyone's opinion on somebody who's never played Monster Hunter before and whether or not they should give this game a chance. Now, naturally, the main reason as to why I'm doing this video is because a lot of people have been exposed to some marketing material for Monster Hunter Wilds, especially after Gamescom, where we got a whole lot of new gameplay, as well as PAX West. I've actually seen people lining up to play the game at Gamescom who had never played Monster Hunter before, and this was going to be their very first Monster Hunter game. And I can imagine that there's probably a lot of people watching from the sidelines wondering if this might be the one that they give a shot to, and maybe even thinking about, maybe I should play another Monster Hunter game to prepare myself for Monster Hunter Wilds. But is it too late, yes or no? And the very easy way to answer this question is going to be no. It's never too late to play a video game, let's be completely honest. So long as the video game is not offline, like, say, Concord, I guess it's probably a little bit too late if you want to play Concord. But if the game is not an always online game, which happens to be the case for all the Monster Hunter games, all the Monster Hunter games can be played completely offline. You're going to be able to play the game whenever you want, and it is never going to be too late to jump in. But there's a couple of more things to consider, because as people jump into a game like Monster Hunter, they might think, oh my god, but this is such a long and storied franchise. Should I play the very first Monster Hunter in the original PlayStation? I probably wouldn't recommend that, at least as your first entry into the franchise. Like, you might want to, tackle something that's a little bit easier, and then if you're still curious, then you might start going back. That would actually be my recommendation. Tackle some of the more modern ones and see how you like those, rather than starting your journey at the very beginning, because that can be a little bit too daunting. At least from my personal opinion, there's nothing wrong with starting it that way if that's something that you want to do. But the idea here is you don't really have to play any of the previous Monster Hunter games in order to enjoy whatever it is, the Monster Hunter game that you're excited for. So if you're excited for Monster Hunter Wilds and you're thinking to yourself, oh man, I need to go back and play all of these other Monster Hunter games, you don't have to do that. As a matter of fact, each Monster Hunter game is like its own entry into the franchise. They work almost like Final Fantasy that way. So, you have similar elements and monsters that show up multiple times in these games. Like, obviously, the biggest one is going to be Rathalos. You'll be familiar with it. It's the big red dragon. Everybody's seen him everywhere. He is one of the main monster. Actually, he is the main monster of Monster Hunter. And there's going to be similar monsters and similar entries of the game, but usually each entry will also feature new monsters, which is kind of like the whole point of the game. As a matter of fact, we recently had the whole thing which showed the most popular monsters, and people voted for those, and then we talked about their themes and all of that. But those are going to be things that you will recognize between titles, but the stories themselves are very much independent. And the reality is most people don't really play these games for the story. We play them for the core gameplay. And this is where you're like, you've seen some combat for Monster Hunter. You might be questioning yourself, okay, but is this game going to be for me? What type of game is it? What's the core gameplay loop? And the fundamental core of what you can expect from Monster Hunter is like, you're going to go out and you're going to go hunt a monster, and you're going to kill that monster, you're going to capture that monster. You don't really have to kill them. You can always capture them with the exception of elder dragons. Whenever it comes to elder dragons, we just got to put those down, okay? Because they're just a little bit too dangerous for the environment, and they're probably going to get a lot of people killed and cause all types of instability. Not even just people. They're going to cause other monsters to get killed and suffer and whatnot. So elder dragons are just very dangerous beasts. We can't capture those. But most of the other monsters you can choose whether to kill or capture. But the idea here is you're going to either kill or capture a monster, and then you're going to harvest it for parts. And then you're going to use those parts, and you're going to make stronger armor and stronger weapons. And that is going to enable you to go and fight a tougher monster. And then you're going to harvest that monster for materials. And then you're going to make stronger armor, stronger weapons. Then you're going to go hunt a tougher monster. And that's kind of the core gameplay loop of Monster Hunter. Now, one of the main things that I really like about this particular franchise, because as you can tell, it's obviously going to be a game that is going to be very much driven by loot. Except everything that you do, or at least in most situations, there's some exceptions here that we can kind of like discuss if you want to get into the nuance of things. But in most situations, most of your loot is going to be somewhat deterministic. So when you are, let's say, oh, I want to make the big fire sword, there's going to be a specific monster that is going to have the parts for you to go make that fire sword, and you can go and you can hunt that monster, and eventually you're going to get the parts for the fire sword. Now, there's going to be some parts that are a little bit rarer, which might take a little bit longer to drop, but basically you can kind of like target the loot that you want to get. Again, there are exceptions to this, but this is one of my favorite aspects of this series, is that you can very much clearly target the things that you want. Whereas, there are other loot-driven games where you just like, oh, just do random things and hope for random drops, and eventually you might get the one random drop that you want. This is kind of like where Monster Hunter really shines, is that deterministic nature approach. Now, you'll also see veterans talk about like decorations and the Koltaroth weapons and all of this stuff that we've discussed at length. But these are kind of like exceptions that are specific to some specific entries in the game that have a little bit more of an RNG element to them. And we don't know exactly how those are going to work in Monster Hunter Wilds, but the core loop, you will have understood it by now. Hunt monster, craft material, craft equipment, hunt tougher monster, repeat until your equipment is like super tough and super powerful. Now, in terms of longevity when it comes to these games, it is very easy for you to get over 100 hours of enjoyment out of a base game, depending on how much you want to put into it, because you can finish the story long before you reach that 100-hour mark. But finishing the story, I hesitate to say this because it's such a cliche, but finishing the story is just the beginning, because then comes the end game and you want to optimize yourself, and they keep throwing tougher and tougher monsters at you. But suffice to say that it is very easy to get 100 hours out of a Monster Hunter game if that is something that you would be interested in. But you can also end your Monster Hunter journey significantly earlier if that is something that you want. And now at this point, you're like, okay, so I've seen the marketing material for Monster Hunter Wilds. Looks really cool, and I want to jump into another Monster Hunter game right now to kind of like, start getting familiar with the series and all of that stuff. Which Monster Hunter game should I jump into? And right now, we have, I would say, 3 flavors of Monster Hunter available in current platforms. So you have Monster Hunter World, which is available in every platform. You have Monster Hunter Rise, which is available on every platform and even the Switch. I kind of feel like we need to separate the Switch a little bit, obviously, because of the hardware challenges that you have when you are putting a game in that platform. And then you have Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, which is only available on the Nintendo Switch, because initially it released as kind of like Nintendo 3DS exclusive in Japan. So there's some Nintendo exclusivity situation there, which is likely why Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate is not available on other platforms. But these are like your 3 flavors of Monster Hunter that you can get right now. Now, if you're just looking to get a feel for the game and what you can expect in Monster Hunter Wilds, my recommendation would be play Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter World is going to be the closest thing that we have to Wilds right now, even though you might be thinking, but the latest one that came out is Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Why would you tell me to play World? Because Again, World is going to be the closest thing that you are going to get to Monster Hunter Wilds, and if you're just curious about Monster Hunter Wilds, World is actually the ideal starting point, in my personal opinion. Does this mean that you shouldn't play Monster Hunter Rise? No, but you should be aware that Monster Hunter Rise is a bit of a different flavor of Monster Hunter. See, Monster Hunter World is much more about the hunting simulation aspects of it, so actually hunting monsters, tracking monsters down, which is something that we've always done in old school Monster Hunter games. It is much more grounded in terms of the action that you can do. This is not to say that there's not some crazy moves like the Wyvern Fire on a gun lance, which is the big gun lance explosion. You're probably watching some gun lance gameplay throughout this video because that's the main weapon that I play, and there are some weapons that do some crazy stuff like clutch onto the monster and then stab him in the face and then explode, and there's still some crazy stuff that happens in Monster Hunter, but the action is a little bit more grounded in Monster Hunter World, whereas if you go for Monster Hunter Rise, it gets a little bit more anime, like there's these wire bug things and you're kind of like moving around the map like Spider-Man and you're riding on the back of dogs and doing all of these crazy things. It's a little bit more arcadey and a little bit less grounded. It's still a ton of fun. Like, understand, I enjoy both of these games tremendously. If you were to ask me which one do you like most, Base World is my favorite game, so just Monster Hunter World without the Iceborne expansion. That's my favorite Monster Hunter experience, but different people are going to have different tastes when it comes to this type of stuff. So that would be the one that I would recommend if you are considering playing Monster Hunter Wilds. However, if you play the entirety of Monster Hunter World and Iceborne and all that stuff, would I still recommend that you play Rise? I mean, yeah, if you're excited for Wilds and you just want to keep that excitement going and you want to play some more Monster Hunter, Rise is also a fantastic title to go. If you happen to be someone who's into Pokemon, I know, really weird, right? You also have Monster Hunter Stories, which plays kind of like Pokemon, except in my opinion, it's way cooler because I like the monsters of Monster Hunter more, and I also think that mechanically, I feel that the combat in Stories is much better than that one in Pokemon. But again, I'm biased towards Monster Hunter, so it is what it is. And then we also have Generations Ultimate. Now, Generations Ultimate is going to feel a lot more old school because you're going to have segregated map zones, which are going to be separated by loading screens, which is one of the things that we used to have back in the day. And the movement is going to feel very different, and the overall animation commitment is going to be much heavier than what you are getting with World and Rise. So it is an older game. It is a taste of old Monster Hunter, if you are curious, but at the same time it also has a lot of more arcade features in there in the form of hunting styles and hunting arts, which is just something that we didn't used to have back in the day. So there's a lot of options of Monster Hunter games for you to play if that is something that you want to get into. You already know what is the core gameplay of Monster Hunter. You already know which of these games I recommend. And now you might be wondering, okay, how's the community looking like for any of these games? And I don't really have numbers for Generations Ultimate because there's no way to get numbers from Nintendo or consoles. So the numbers that I have are actually from Steam right now. And World is actually, as of the recording of this video, has a 24-hour peak of over 50,000 concurrent players, which is a lot. Its biggest peak ever was like 300,000, although you can't really take that into that much of a consideration due to the fact that this game had a staggered release for PC. That's not something that is going to be happening with Monster Hunter moving forward. Everything is going to be releasing at the same time as per what the devs have told us, but basically you still have a fairly healthy community on the PC side of things, and I would expect this to be mirrored in both consoles, Xbox as well as PlayStation. So if you want to jump into World, there should be a fairly healthy population there. And even with Rise, it has a 24-hour concurrent count of 15,000 players, which is still a lot. Again, this is 15, not 50, which is still a decent chunk of players for you to play with. And I'm sure that you'll be able to find lobbies of people to play with and stuff like that. So in terms of the community aspect, you can still do multiplayer and all of that stuff. And I know that for a lot of people, another important thing is going to be, but is it soloable? Can I play the game by myself, or do I actually need other players to play with? And this one's a little bit of a more nuanced answer, because a majority of the game is soloable. Like all of the story content, that is 100% soloable. Most of the hunts are soloable, but there are some special hunts in Monster Hunter World that are basically scaled for multiplayer. Now, these are still soloable if you are an individual of exceptional skill, but they are tuned to be played with more players. Now, these hunts are hunts like Extremoth, which is actually a collaboration that they've done with Final Fantasy, where you actually get to fight an extreme version of Behemoth. And that is going to be scaled for 4 players, which, like I said, it is possible to solo, but it is exceedingly challenging. And there are other things, like there's an encounter called Safi Jiva, which is also scaled for 4 players. But not only that, it is scaled in a way for you to have like a whole lobby of players helping you out. So if you want to face up against Safi Jiva, you are going to... I mean, your average player is going to absolutely need other players, even though, again, like I said, all this stuff is soloable. It's just the time investment is going to be absolutely astronomical if you're going to try to solo these things, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But again, all of these things like Safi Jiva, Extremoth, or even the Siege of Kolv Taroth, which was only for base world, all of these things are completely optional, and the vast majority of the game is soloable, but at the same time, like I said, there's still a significant amount of people in the community that are playing this game right now, so it should be fairly easy for you to do stuff with other players if that is something that you want. In terms of Monster Hunter Rise, I don't think there's a single piece of content that is scaled for multiple players, and on top of it, Monster Hunter Rise benefits from a system that Capcom implemented, which is the companion system, wherein you actually get NPCs to help you hunt, which is also a feature that is going to be present in Monster Hunter Wilds. So even if there aren't players around, you'll be able to recruit AI NPCs to help you hunt as an option if that is something that you want to do. So if you are concerned about where the community is at with any of these games, like I said, I think it should be fairly easy to get into multiplayer lobbies for both Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise. I don't know what that experience is like on PC right now, because usually I play solo most of the time, or I just play with my community whenever I'm live streaming, but considering the player counts, it can't be that hard to jump into a lobby at this point. And, you know, it is what it is. And at this point, some of you guys might be wondering, okay, does it have any pay-to-win microtransactions? Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise do not feature any pay-to-win microtransactions at all, and as per the interview that I've done with the developers, this is not something that they plan on changing for Monster Hunter Wilds, so Monster Hunter Wilds will also not feature any paid any pay-to-win microtransactions at all. In terms of cosmetic microtransactions, the game does have several cosmetic microtransactions, particularly Monster Hunter World Iceborne, the expansion. It has like all of these things that you can do with there's a house that you get in that game, and there's a ton of decorations that you can put on that house and whatnot, and they've basically sold people a ton of decorations for the house. There's also cosmetic armor, but the game has a layered armor system, which is basically transmog. And all of the Monster Hunter games are going to be having that moving forward, is my understanding. All of the ones that I talked about here have a transmog system, which is included in the game, and you don't need to pay for it. And there's a tremendous amount of armor that you can craft for yourself if your end game is going to be fashion. So, it is what it is. There have been some cosmetic microtransactions that I'm not a huge fan of, particularly with Rise and Sunbreak, in the form of these special-looking weapons, which give you no in-game advantage. They just look a little bit more special than some of the weapons available in-game. That was a little bit frustrating, but at the end of the day, never pay to win, never anything like that. In terms of RNG, there is some RNG in these games in the form of, when it comes to Rise, there's a specific piece of gear that you get, which is a charm. That is RNG, so you'll have to gamble. This gambling notion, I'm doing air quotes, because it's not really like with real life money or anything like that. It's just in-game resources that you can only get by playing the game, and you'll have to spend some of those resources to hopefully get like a good roll on a charm. This is for Rise. In the case of Monster Hunter World, you just grind monsters, and eventually you're going to get these things called decorations, and that is going to be the RNG element. Now, World also has some RNG weapons, but those aren't always the best ones. They are best in some very specific niche cases if you're doing a very specific build, but even those are not terrible, and with some of the improvements that they've done with Iceborne, they're not too hard to get. So what about the overall support that you tend to get with a Monster Hunter game? Well, usually the way that Monster Hunter games work is they will release the base game, which features what most hunters will call low rank and high rank, which is kind of like two difficulties that you get. So usually these games will start in low rank, which is basically means easier monsters. You kill these monsters, you progress through them, you make armor out of them, and you make weapons and all of that stuff. And then eventually you progress into high rank. And then once you get to high rank, things get a little bit harder. And then eventually there's another system that will show up in endgame. In the case of Monster Hunter World, it was tempered monsters, which are like stronger versions of monsters, but also drop more decorations and other rewards that you could get. And in the case of Rise, the end game was just like harder monsters. But the idea is you have this game, they release the game, it comes with low and high rank, which is, like I already said, over 100 hours, and they support this game for about a year and change. That's been the case, a year and a couple of months. At which point they will then announce, okay guys, we're working on an expansion, and they will go and they will work on that expansion. They will still support the game while they're working on the expansion. Then eventually the expansion releases. And these expansions, you're talking, again, upwards of 100 hours. I want you guys to understand, when I say 100 hours, I'm being extremely conservative. It's like, okay, if you only play one weapon and you finish the story and maybe you optimize for a little bit, that's like your 100 hours. A majority of Monster Hunter players will easily spend over 300 hours. Me personally, as a content creator, I've spent over 3,000 hours playing Monster Hunter World and Iceborne. I've spent, I think, close to 2,000 hours playing Rise and Sunbreak. So, as you guys can imagine, it's very easy to rack up hours in these games because there's a lot of min-maxing to do in the form of optimizing your character to be really strong. There's a lot of strong monsters that they add to the game after the game's been out in the form of new content, new quests, and then some event quests, collaboration quests that give you like special looking cosmetic gear, as well as different looking weapons and so on and so forth. So there's reasons for you to continue playing the game long after you finish the story, if that is something that you want to do. So again, these games get supported for like a year and a couple of months. Then the big expansion comes out. That expansion is again upwards of from 100 to 500 hours, maybe even more, depending on how much fun you're having, because basically you do get to a point where it's like, oh, do I want to try out a new weapon? Do I want to make out a new mixed set? And all of these things, these are going to be things that are going to give you a lot of motivation to keep playing the game. But yeah, those expansions, again, anywhere from 100 to 500 hours of gameplay, and they will support those expansions with new content for another year and a couple of months. And then after that, they will announce, okay, now we're working on the next entry of Monster Hunter, and, you know, look forward to it, the usual thing, and then they go and they work on the next Monster Hunter game. And now me, personally, I prefer this to the live service approach because it gives the team freedom to completely experiment with brand new things without having to worry about like, oh man, these players have been playing this character for upwards of 10 years, and now this is a problem because power creep, because of this specific item that breaks the game, because of this monster that doesn't work properly with the new systems, yada yada yada. That is the big advantage of doing new games, and me personally, I heavily prefer this over the live service approach of just like, oh, new expansion, 10 more levels for your character. So basically, whenever a new game comes out, you start fresh. But that still means that you are playing that same game for approximately, I think, 3 to 4 years. That's usually like what you can expect to be playing if you get involved into a Monster Hunter game, because you have the base game, then you have the big expansion, and there's tons and tons of hours of entertainment to get if that is something that you want to get into. And again, I want to reinforce that it's not like this is mandatory. It's like, oh, you gotta put in all of these hours to have fun. It is also possible to jump into a Monster Hunter game, play for 50 hours. It's like, hey, I had my fun. Game's a blast. had a blast, and I think I'm good. Like, you can exit. There's plenty of exit ramps for the game whenever you're like, oh, I feel like I've done everything that I've wanted and I'm good, and and then the players that want to keep going, they will be able to keep going. So basically there's a lot of bang for your buck, but not all of it is mandatory. If you just want to play the game until you hit credits, that's a perfectly fine way to do it too. But basically, this is one of my favorite franchises, and I hope that you guys consider it, because I know that there's been a lot of people out there that are watching footage from Monster Hunter Wilds, and they're thinking, man, am I just too late? Did I miss out on the train? And you haven't. You absolutely haven't, and I can assure you, this is one of the most welcoming communities that you will ever engage with. Like, engage with people online, ask them about, oh, which weapon should I main? There's 14 different weapons to choose from, and everybody's going to try to convince you to play their weapon, but obviously you should be playing Gunlance because, I mean, come on. Come on, have you been watching the gameplay in this video? You should absolutely be playing Gunlance. I mean, what are you going to do? Play Longsword? Come on, now be real. I'm joking. I'm going to keep playing into that meme because I know that it upsets a lot of people, but that's funny to me, so whatever. Anyway, you should definitely pick whatever weapon you think is best for you, whichever weapon you gel with the most. And feel free to join in on my live streams and ask me questions about Monster Hunter. I'm always happy to interact with people that are curious about jumping into Monster Hunter and all that good stuff. And I hope this video helped you out. And also make sure to check out the comment section because, like I said at the start, I asked people to, weigh in on their opinion as to whether or not it is too late to jump in on the Monster Hunter train, which I'm pretty sure that the community is also going to tell you, hell no, brother. Welcome to the fold. Pick up your Gunlance, or they're probably going to say their own favorite weapon, like pick up the hunting horn, pick up the longsword, pick up the bow, the light bow gun, the lance, whatever, dude. Pick up the, if you watch Rage Gaming videos, it's going to be like, the great sword! Tell them about the great sword, Rurikhan! It is what it is. But yeah, thank you all very much for watching. And once again, make sure to share this with your friends that you're trying to get into Monster Hunter. Maybe I'll be able to convince them. Maybe not. We'll see. But for now, that's going to be it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.